This podcast and content posted by Dr. Judith Joseph is presented solely for general informational, educational, and entertainment purposes. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from this podcast or website is at the user's own risk. It is not intended as a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional diagnoses or treatment. Users should not disregard or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Isis Asare is the CEO and founder of Sistah Scifi, the first Black-owned bookstore focused on science fiction and fantasy in the United States, as validated by the American Booksellers Association. In February 2023, the first 3 Sistah Scifi book vending machines were launched in California and Washington. And in March 2024, Asare became the first African-American executive director of the Aunt Lute Foundation, the second oldest feminist press in the country. They see a character that looks like them, that has a similar background, who's struggling, who's experiencing things that may be similar to what they're experiencing. That is validating and healing. Isis and I first met at Columbia Business School, where we became very good friends. And she has since left corporate positions in order to pursue her passion to be an entrepreneur in this space. We discussed how important it is to have representation in literature.
Everybody's like, Black boys don't read. And it's like, is that the conclusion? Or is it like the publishing industry isn't publishing a lot of works that Black boys would be interested in? So there was that, but then there's also like reading the book and in one scene, somebody's like telling the main character like, bruh, I love you and you need therapy, right? And I'm saying this with love. And like the main character received that. And I was just like, wow, the growth.
And how Black authors are using diverse characters to play out mental health themes so that underrepresented communities feel seen. You will not want to miss this fantasy-filled and creative episode of The Vault. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast in The Vault.
I'm excited to be here. I'm a little nervous, to be honest, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, you know what? There's a thin line between nerves and excitement, so you're in a good place.
Thank you. Awesome.
I love everything that you're doing in the book and entertainment space, because there really isn't enough, I think, opportunities for women of color, for queer people, for women in science to really express their creative sides. And you have made a path for this. So tell us about your industry and what you're doing in terms of literature and opening up doors for so many women.
Wow. I haven't framed it like that, so thank you for that. I'm Isis. I run Sistah Scifi. Sistah Scifi is the first Black-owned bookstore focused on science fiction and fantasy. I remember the first time I said it, I just stopped it there, and somebody's like, according to who? Where in the world? And I was like, in the U.S., as validated by the American Booksellers Association. I started Sistah Scifi in 2019 and then launched 3 Sistah Scifi book vending machines. So 2 are in Seattle, Washington, and 1 is in downtown Oakland, California.
That's incredible. And you're someone who's had a lot of education. Stanford, Harvard, Columbia Business School. You've been in the corporate space. And how did you decide to pivot and get out of the corporate world and then enter the book world? That's a huge pivot.
It's a very huge pivot. I used to watch these television shows and somebody's like, I'm a pastor and like, I just got a calling. And I was like, that just sounds like shenanigans, but I just got a calling. I can't believe I'm saying that. But I started Sistah Scifi because I was talking about a book with a friend. And after we started talking about the book, she was like a Black speculative fiction title, Lilith's Rude by Octavia Butler. And she started naming all these other authors. And I was like, who? And I was deeply in my feels. Like, as supposedly I'm well educated. I was like, I should know who these women are. They're West African, like first generation West African speculative fiction authors. And I was like, I had no clue. And I was like, nobody else is going to miss this memo on my watch. So I started it as a side hustle and it kind of grew from there. And one day, like early, I was telling my younger sister about it and she was like, Sistah Scifi is the most authentic thing you've done in your whole entire life. And I'm like, sibling shade. And I was like, okay, I see the universe trying to put me on the right path. So that's what I mean by it was appalling.
Well, first of all, I love your sister, and I love how brutally honest she is.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I agree that it's but maybe it is the most authentic. But you're a pretty authentic person.
I like to think so.
I love. So the authors that you're naming, like, tell us about that space, like the West African sci-fi Black woman author space, because I have to be honest. Until you started posting about it, because I follow you, I had no idea that space even existed.
It's a thing. Yeah, it's a for real thing. So Sistah Scifi, when I started Sistah Scifi, I was really focused on Black women who write speculative fiction, and really like Octavia Butler being like the quintessential author. Right. Octavia Butler wrote Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents, Kindred, which was adapted. We won't talk about that, but Kindred, which was adapted to Hulu. But when I talk about like West African speculative fiction, that's when you talk about Tomi Adeyemi. Most people have heard of Children of the Blood and Bone at this point. There's Nnedi Okorafor, who's written Binti, Akata Witch, Akata Warrior. She is super prolific. I could be here for the rest of the interview naming all the stuff that she's written. So those are the two, like West African speculative fiction women writers are the two most well-known names. But then going to broader like Black women, you have N.K. Jemisin, who won the Hugo, which is like speculative fiction's version of like the Stanley Cup. I don't know why I'm picking a hockey award. This is like, I know nothing about sports, so I don't know why. But like, and she won the Hugo Awards like 3 years in a row, which was like one of the first time to do it. Very rare for a Black woman to do it. So yeah, so like we're out here. Like, and when I started, like people started sending me this list of like Black women who wrote science fiction, and there was like 400 or 500 names on that list, right? So Black women are definitely writing speculative fiction. We're very prolific in this space. Yeah, people are like, oh my God, there's so many books on Sistah Scifi. I was like, and this is like probably 1/10 of what's published in a given year. So yeah.
It's so important because like when you have the different facets of what you think a Black woman author should look like, and you challenge that and you provide all of these examples of very different writers, different backgrounds, but they're Black women. I think it's just so important because children see that, youth see that, and then they learn that they don't have to be within a certain box. And I know that many people who are listening, they've probably been told, stay in your lane, just stick to this one thing and then you'll be successful. But when you do that, you don't get to be your authentic self. And by you pursuing something that felt really authentic for you, you're helping others to be brave enough to be authentic. And I do a lot of content on how important it is to see Black women in different roles in television and film, not just to see the stereotype, because you and I have traveled extensively. So when you go to other parts of the world and they see that these caricatures in film, they're going to think that, well, that's what all Black women are like. So that's why we need to have this representation. It's not just for being fair and equitable. It's also good for our mental health. It's good for our self-confidence, our self-worth, our self-esteem. Because being judged and having these microaggressions or even aggressive behaviors towards us based on stereotypes, it hurts, it harms us. And it makes it difficult for us to advance in fields. And I don't know if you were even thinking that far out when you were following your passion, but tell us some of the things that you've heard, during this process for you, during running this company and meeting authors. Tell us whether or not you heard that message of validation from people.
Yeah. One, I was like, oh yeah, I was like, Judith, Dr. Judith is dropping the knowledge. So many ways to respond. But in terms of responses to me, beyond my sister, when I started Sistah Scifi, I think readers felt very seen. So like for Black women who have been interested in speculative fiction since like the beginning, right? They're like, wow, I'm not the only Black person or woman like really interested in this stuff. Before I started Sistah Scifi, there was a very active Black speculative fiction community, so they embraced me with open arms. So that was really excited to be active in that. And I think authors just really appreciate knowing like when they write a book, like there's a space that is 100% dedicated to like that intersectionality of Blackness and speculative fiction, because speculative fiction is kind of like looked down upon in literature, and then you have like Blackness and like all the prejudices that surround that. So it can be like a double weight when trying to find an audience for a title in that space, of knowing like there's a channel where like we will always be playing that genre, right, is very exciting for authors and for publishers. Yeah, and then like there is a mindset shift when you see like cultural differences. So for readers who are not Black, who are not women, who are not queer, like people who read science fiction in general, and this is a broad and gross generalization, are more likely to relate to the other, because most speculative fiction is weird. It's different. It's not the everyday. So most people who read speculative are like excited to read stories from a different culture, from a different background, from a different like sexual or gender orientation from their own, right? To deepen their own sense of empathy, to deepen their own sense of imagination and creativity. So that has been really exciting for me, both in terms of my identity, in terms of like grounding my confidence, which like was actually not the best way of corporate America, right? And like I can show up and be my full authentic self, and people can be excited, period, just for that, right? And so that has been really validating for me.
Yeah, definitely. It challenges what, people traditionally think others want to see. You'll hear this time and time again. People are like, well, certain demographics only want to see this because they're used to it. And it's just not true. From human psychology, we know that the brain lights up when there's something new. People are curious, and curiosity actually combats feelings of boredom and depression and just feeling stuck in a rut. So having access to different perspectives, different lives, that all opens up so many doors in our imagination and actually excites us. So, that old argument is absolutely false. And you're working with so many talented authors and you're meeting so many people. I just wonder if you could share a bit about how brave you must have been and afraid to do something so bold, because Black women entrepreneurs are like the largest group, one of the largest and fastest groups of entrepreneurs, right, that are growing in this country. And people are like, they're ditching the corporate life. They want to do things that feed their soul, but it's scary. It's not easy. And we always hear about the successes and we see the, all the inspiring stories, but behind the doors, it's hard work. And tell us about some of the challenges that you've faced and overcome or are still dealing with when it comes to, making your own way and following these passions.
Yeah, whew, that's a question. I was like, how long we got? You remember that episode of Insecure when Issa Rae goes back to Stanford and she's on the panel and she's like, I'm totally faking it. And she totally flails out. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like that's my life every day. So yeah, I mean, there's a sense of like, oh, I'm doing something different. It lights up all different parts of my brain. And that's exciting. And the work feels very meaningful and authentic. And, like I like structure, right? So I definitely miss that structure of corporate America, right? And there is a lot to navigate. Like, when I was a finance at a Fortune 500 company, like I could focus on like creating this report that could be like my task or whatever. As an entrepreneur, it's like I'm all the things all the time. And it's managing a team. And so that's different. But the one thing that past me gifted myself, and I'm very grateful for, sometimes I'm like, why did you do that past me? But this is one thing past me did is I joined Sister Biz, which was a community of Black women entrepreneurs, because I knew like as I left, I needed to make sure that I had a supportive community. So that was amazing for me. And for the first time in my life, I got a therapist. I was like, because I was starting Sistah Scifi and it was the pandemic. And I was like, sis, if there's ever a time you needed a therapist, this is the time. So I think those two things really helped me in terms of my capacity, in terms of like my limiting beliefs, in terms of my self-doubt, and navigating. I mean, like everything's hard, but like entrepreneurship, particularly as a Black woman, was particularly like stressful and emotionally activating at times. But having those resources in my toolkit was definitely very profound. So, yeah.
Yeah. Community helps, therapy helps, and also starting a business where you love it helps, because a business, for some people think it sounds sexy, you're an entrepreneur, but if you don't love the business, it's not going to do well. And you're going to just make yourself depressed in the process. You're going to make yourself stressed in the process. So you got to love what you do.
Yeah.
Right.
100%. Because like, you know, loving what I do, like it creates other opportunities. So like now recently, I probably put this in my bio. We talked about this via email. Like I'm also like a fractional executive director at Aunt Lute, which is like one of the oldest feminist press, nonprofit feminist press in the US. Had you asked me 10 years ago, would I be doing this? I would be like, no, but I love bringing books to a receptive community. I love making those connections. And then it just so happens like the first two books that I get to like bring to the road with Aunt Lute are speculative fiction written by Black women. So I was like, oh, this is fun. So yeah, it does really help if you love it, because when things are hard, it's like, it's not just it's hard and I hate this job. It's like, it's hard and I love what I'm doing.
Yeah. And I know how you said that, you had a moment where you were like, I'm just faking it. I've known you for years. And I remember when you were running between your grad program at Columbia and your grad program at Harvard, nobody thought you were faking it.
I was definitely faking it.
I think it's refreshing for people like you to be like, you know what? I'm just trying to figure it out too. Because it's like, really? Because you looked really put together. And I mean, I study high functioning depression, and I see it in Black women a lot, because we're not allowed to fail. Like, I know it sounds, people are like, oh, you know, it's a victim mentality. I get that a lot on my social feed, people saying you're playing the victim. But I mean, the reality is we can't. We have to show up. We can't make mistakes. You know, we feel like we're lucky enough to be here, and living like that is draining. It wears on us. So we have to lean on each other. We have to use community, because that's where we can be vulnerable. That's where we can say, I need help. I need support. What are you doing? Because I need help over here. Can you please, you know, share your secrets with me? And then also by us being vulnerable, we're helping someone else to let their guards down. So we really do need to lean on each other.
Yeah. And I love all your TikToks, but the TikTok about like high functioning depression, I was like, I mean, I guess that is, and then you like were doing the television characters. And I was like, because before you said, I was like, yeah, we know Olivia Pope is going to be on there. And then it was like a bunch of other Shonda Rhimes characters. So it makes me wonder about Shonda Rhimes. But yes. I'm ready.
Well, I'm a believer that television and characters and books are powerful mental health tools. I don't think, you know, I trained at very traditional institutions, and I think that we have to look at mental health differently. Mm-hmm. We're going to lose an entire generation if we're not creative in educating people. And I think that when you open a book, like when someone opens one of the books that you promote, that one of the characters that one of your authors has written, and they see themselves and they see a character that looks like them, that has a similar background, who's struggling, who's experiencing things that may be similar to what they're experiencing, that is validating and healing, and they feel seen. And so we do need to use these creative outlets to reach people, because telling someone, oh, like, read this study because I think it applies to you, right, that's not going to work for a lot of people. Right. You know, they need to see it in a creative form, and that's how they feel like they can get the help that they need.
100%. Yeah, like I just finished reading Blood at the Root by Ladarian Williams, which is like it's a YA fantasy with a black boy main character. And when he's trying to publish it, everybody's like, black boys don't read. And it's like, is that the conclusion? Or is it like the publishing industry isn't publishing a lot of works that black boys would be interested in? So there was that. But then there's also like reading the book, and in one scene, somebody's like telling the main character, like, bruh, I love you and you need therapy, right? And I'm saying this with love. And like the main character received that. And I was just like, wow, the growth. Because when we're in business school, like that would have never happened in like a book for black people, right? So yeah.
Yeah, it's so powerful. It's so needed. What you're doing is so needed. I always ask my experts and incredible entrepreneurs to reflect on a time in their lives when on the outside, they were put together and everyone was like, wow, they have it figured out. I want to be just like them. But they knew on the inside it wasn't all put together and they were actually struggling. And how did they get through it?
Oh, Judith. Because I think what's the imposter syndrome in me is like, when was the time in life where people had it all put together? So I'm struggling with that part. Ooh, I don't know. Let's come back to that next visit. Okay. I'll have a better answer to that. But for right now, I'm like, I don't know, because I think I always feel like I'm processing and trying to figure it out, and everybody around me and everybody looking at me knows I'm processing it and trying to figure it out. So yeah, I'm always like looking at people like, wow, they have it so put together. Look at Judith, she has it so put together. Like look at Pinky, the owner of Slutty Vegan, like right now she's like my inspiration. I was like, oh wow, she has it so put together. Or Tabitha Brown, or like, so yeah, I hope people know that I'm trying to figure it out one day at a time.
Listen, I always talk about how I'm just trying to figure it out too. People think that therapists have it figured out. No, we're people just like you, right? Like I'm in therapy. I go to my therapist to figure things out too. But I think it is important to talk about it because then you don't feel so bad. You don't feel so alone.
Right.
Where can we find you? Where can we follow you and support your books and your authors?
Yeah, so it's Sistah Scifi on all the things. Sistah, TAH, and Sci-Fi, spelled sci-fi, on the interweb. So like sistahscifi.com, Sistah Scifi on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube, literally all the things. And then if you want to reach out to me personally, it's Isis Asare, also on all the things, except I don't have a website quite yet. And yeah.
And tell us about some of the authors that you're excited about.
There's so many. I should have brought a list, but I'll focus on, there's Michelle Tracy Berger. She is publishing Doll Seed. That is out October 1st. There is Sibo Campbell, who is writing it, and Doll Seed is a collection of speculative short stories, most of which have a woman protagonist, and it goes from everything from like the main character is the doll that was used in like the Supreme Court case on Brown versus the Board of Education to like angst against Disney princesses, which I was totally here for that range of books. Another book I'm excited about is Sibo Campbell's A Sky Full of Elephants. And the premise is, what if we woke up one day as a country and like all the white people were gone? What would it mean to be Black? I'm not advocating for all the white people to disappear. I'm advocating for what is Blackness when we take away the comparison to whiteness. I'm excited about We Came to Welcome You. It's a suburban horror by Vincent Toronto, who's like one of my favorite, not super properly known horror writers. They grew up in New York, and their first story was set in the Bronx. So it's cool to see Vincent have set stories in different places and tap into different sources of horror. So in their first book, there was horror, and community was kind of the way to move through that. In this book, the question is, what if community is the source of horror? So I'm very excited about that. And I could go on, but I'll stop there.
That's a good list. I'll check those out for sure. Thank you so much for being on the vault. And I'm excited about your company. And I know that your authors are going to do really well.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Judith.